What a great way to start the afternoon. We just heard pianist Laura Melton performing the first of 3 piano preludes by Samuel Adler. Samuel Adler is actually sitting across from me in the studio today. He celebrated his 90th birthday this past Sunday, and he has been so gracious as to spend the afternoon with myself and with you, dear listeners. We're going to be talking about his life. We are going to be playing some of his recordings. 2 things I want to put out there first. Samuel Adler has published a book called Building Bridges with Music, Stories from a Composer's Life. That's from Pendragon Press, and it is a fascinating collection of stories about his entire life as a musician, as a composer, as a conductor, as a teacher, as an author. Just fascinating stories in there. And we're going to talk about many of those today as we follow the trajectory of his career. And there is also a new 3-CD set out called One Lives But Once, a 90th birthday celebration that is from Lynn Records. And we're going to sample that throughout the afternoon. Now, here's a hypothetical. If you stood at the top of a mountain looking out over the vast landscape of classical music, in one direction you would look at the great composers of the 20th century, in the other direction you would look at the musical luminaries, the emerging composers and artists of the 21st century, I'd be willing to bet standing at the top of that mountain would be Samuel Adler, because if we list all of the folks that he has brushed shoulders with in his 90 years on this earth, I'm willing to bet it would cover just about every important musician in the 20th century, and certainly up into our present time. So there's the introduction. First of all, let me wish you a very happy birthday.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon.
You were in Dallas for your actual birthday on Sunday, right? That is a city with which you have a great deal of history.
Yes, I served in the Army from 1950 to the end of 1952, and after I was released, I went to Dallas to become music director at Temple Emmanuel, which is a very large, I understand, being Texas, the largest Reformed Jewish congregation in the world today. And I taught at the Hockaday School and also at the University of North Texas, and conducted the Dallas Lyric Theater, which was the opera that preceded the Dallas Opera.
Right. Well, you did a lot of conducting in after you got out of the Army. We're going to rewind in a little bit and talk about your years and leading up to it. But the first piece of music that we're going to hear, aside from what we just started with, is from your Symphony No. 1. This dates from 1953. You were in Dallas. You wanted to get back into composing. You entered a contest.
That's right.
A composition contest?
It was a competition sponsored by the Dallas Symphony and the University of Texas in Austin. And it was for $1,000, which in those days was a fortune.
Yeah.
And it was to write a major work for the next season for the Dallas Symphony. I took a chance. I got there February 1st, 1953, and the contest was for March 15th. I wrote a piece for the competition, sent it in without any hope. But to my great surprise, I won the competition.
Yeah.
And they said, write a major piece. And I decided, well, I just got out of the service. I feel absolutely wonderful. I'm going to write, if possible, my first symphony. And that summer, I spent all summer, well, actually 2.5 months, writing this first symphony. And everybody says that the second movement, which I think we're going to start with, has some flavor of the Southwest. Well, I hope so. It's a slow movement, or rather slow, and then the last movement is a wild going to the end.
This is a recent recording of your Symphony No. 1, written in 1953, premiered by the Dallas Symphony, correct? Symphony. We're going to hear the Brandenburgisches Staatsorchester of Frankfurt. How's my German? It's okay.
Very good. Excellent.
This is directed by your wife, Emily Freeman Brown. Music of Samuel Adler, here on FM 91. the Symphony Number 1. We heard the second and third movement, but we heard a little bit of the third movement to begin with. I hit the wrong track, and I have to say that's just because I'm so nervous that the composer is sitting here with me. That's music of Samuel Adler from his Symphony Number 1, written in 1953 for the Dallas Symphony. And Sam, you mentioned that, it had kind of a Texas, a southern feel to it. It certainly does paint a picture of the
that's what
Western
everybody
Plains.
says.
Yeah. I imagine the audience back at the time was very receptive.
They loved it,
that
and
piece.
the Dallas Symphony actually took both the first and second symphony on tour of the state of Texas, and then with the second symphony went all over South America.
Wow.
At that time, Walter Handel was the conductor, and he was one of the fair-haired boys of being one of the first American conductors to have a major symphony orchestra. And up to now, the Dallas Symphony has premiered 10 of my orchestral pieces.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, we mentioned you were in Dallas for your actual birthday, which was this past Sunday, 90 years old. Celebrations coming in from around the world. You said you had upwards of 300 emails just from your students wishing you a happy birthday. And it should be said that, you're not just well known as a composer, but also as a conductor and as an author. I want to talk about your orchestration book, which has personal significance to me. We'll do that a little later. And especially as a teacher. You taught 30 years at Eastman and 19 years, I believe, at Juilliard. Yeah, and
12 years at North Texas.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I knew I was forgetting something.
That's all right.
You have a new book out called Building Bridges with Music, Stories from a Composer's Life. This is a beautiful, beautiful book, by the way, which is just chock full of these amazing stories now. And we also just heard from a 3D CD set called One Lives But Once, a 90th birthday celebration. One Lives But Once. That was a favorite saying of your mother, right?
It was.
Yeah.
And she loved to dance. And there is a piece on that recording which is a dance suite. And it's an interesting bit of history there. The Mannheim Orchestra, I was born in Mannheim, as you already mentioned, and the Mannheim Orchestra was very famous during the classical period. It was with the Paris Orchestra, the two orchestras that had clarinets. And especially Mozart loved the Mannheim Orchestra, and he came there very often, especially since he got engaged and married a Mannheim girl.
Yeah.
But that's beside the point. But he wrote a great deal for the Mannheim Orchestra, and the Elector of Mannheim was a great music lover. And he imported very important people from Bohemia, musicians, to come to his court. The leading one was Stamitz. And they organized an orchestra and a whole music program. And, of course, as entertainment, they did a lot of dance suites.
Yeah.
And the Mannheim Orchestra in 1990 commissioned me to write a piece which was a concerto for woodwind quintet and orchestra. And after that, they commissioned for 20 years 20 composers to write pieces for them, one each year. And they asked every one of them to write a dance suite, and everybody refused for some reason.
Wow.
And the 13th year, the man who sponsored it with his bank, the Southwest German Bank, retired, and he said he liked my piece best of all the pieces that had been commissioned up to that time, and they asked me to write a dance suite.
Yeah.
And I said, well, why not? I mean, after all, everybody's written dances before. Why shouldn't I? And I remembered my mother saying, one lives but once, therefore one loves to dance.
Yeah.
And so I called that piece, which I think we'll listen to a little later.
Yeah. Yeah, we will definitely. But first, you mentioned Mozart and Mannheim and the Weber family, and we've spoken about this before, but your mother was quite pleased when she gave birth to you to see a plaque on the wall. What did that plaque say?
The plaque on the outside of the hospital said that in the place where the hospital was built was the Weber house, which was the home of Mozart's beloved and then wife, and that Mozart lived there whenever he was in Mannheim. My mother took a picture of the plaque and said to my father, "Our son is going to be a composer." Yeah. So I couldn't help but become a composer, you see.
That's such a great story. Talk a little bit about your father, because we're going to sample your Symphony Number 2, written in 1957, not too long after your father passed, and you dedicated it to him.
Yes.
This is somebody who had a tremendous influence on your life.
My father was the last chief cantor of the Central Synagogue of Mannheim, and he came to Mannheim as the second of 5 cantors at the Central Synagogue in 1921. He was a rebel right away because he was of the new school, meaning that he thought music in the synagogue should not all sound like Mendelssohn in the 19th century. Because during the 19th century, Mendelssohn was the model for all church music, whether it was Jewish or non-Jewish, especially Episcopal and the Church of England. Mendelssohn had a tremendous influence, and it was a good influence also on the synagogue music. But he felt that one should write new music and even change the old. Yeah. And this is an interesting thing, that he fooled around with the music that was traditional in the synagogue. And of course, the people didn't like it. Yeah. They liked the way it was. And the board especially was very angry at his changing the synagogue music. Well, in 1924, they told him if he changes even another note, they would throw him out. Well, he did something very smart. He was in love with my mother at that time, and he married her. And my grandfather was a member of the board. Well, you don't throw the cantor that married one of the board members' daughters out right away.
Right.
And my mother was a very, very clever woman. She said to him, "Look, okay, you want to change the music? Write your own. Don't change the old music, write your own." And he did that and became very successful, especially in Germany, during the Hitler era, when Jews could no longer take part in general music. They made their own organization called the Kulturbund, and he was very, very active in it and wrote music for the entire nation, all the Kulturbunds which were in existence in every large city in Germany at that time.
Yeah. You spent the first 10 years of your life in Mannheim, and it was a horrible, horrible time, I know, for Jewish people there in Germany. And you tell some stories in the book which are frankly hard to, get through reading-wise, but it's so compelling, the story you tell of fleeing Germany and getting out and the difficulties that you faced. Not just the difficulties you faced, but also the providence that came your way in getting out. For instance, Kristallnacht was sort of a turning point for you. Right. Your dad sent your mom to go get the passports. He took off in another direction, and he was missing for some time.
Well, we were lucky in several ways. As a matter of fact, I should say in all ways, since we got out. But my father happened to have been born in Belgium, in Antwerp, where his parents lived for 2 years. And 2 of their children were born there, one of my uncles and my father. Well, that made him, according to American law, a Belgian citizen. And we got out on the Belgian quota. We would never have gotten out on the German quota because it was always filled. 27,000 people from Germany could be admitted a year to the United States, and 100 people from Belgium. Well, not even 100 people wanted to come from Belgium.
Didn't you draw numbers in the 30s?
We were 35, 36, 37, 38. My sister and I, the 2 children, and the 2 parents. So that we were able to get a passport, and we got the passport on Kristall on the 10th of November, 1938. My father took his passport and went, or tried to go to Holland, where we had a very a wealthy relative who was going to take us in for a little while. He, of course, was caught at the border because there was a J in his passport, and they knew who he was then. And he was taken to Sachsenhausen, which was a kind of a concentration camp near Berlin, actually. And he was missing. After 4 days, President Roosevelt pulled back his ambassador to Berlin and said, with barbarians who do this kind of thing to their own citizens, we can't do any business.
Right.
So the Nazis realized this was a misstep, and they let, I think, 50,000 men were taken into custody on the 10th of November, including my father. They let them go. My father came back to Mannheim, and I told you that he was against all that traditional music.
Yeah.
But when he came back, he said, we're going to go to America, and I've got to show the tradition of Mannheim, which was into the early 19th century, and take the music with us.
Well, it should be said that the synagogue had
been bombed.
Yeah.
You know, the east wall was out. There was a bomb under the organ, which was hanging down by one cable. But he insisted to take me into the synagogue. He knew a secret way. Underneath the street, there was a tunnel which you could go through and go into the synagogue, which he knew. And we went up to the choir loft, which was in horrible shapes. There was a bomb had been under the organ. There were books all over the place, but we were able to get all 17 part books for the traditional music. And it was very dusty, of course. And being a child of 10, I sneezed.
Oh.
Well, we heard the captain downstairs say, go upstairs and shoot at will.
Oh.
At that moment, the organ fell down. Now, I don't know what happened downstairs, but nobody came upstairs, and we got down, and we got out of the building into the tunnel, and here I am.
Yeah, what an amazing story. Well, and also during Kristallnacht, as I understand it, the building where you lived was protected by one of your neighbors.
We were protected, our building, yes, by the neighbors. He was one of the highest SS people because he wanted to go into the army, but he was also a very devout Catholic who did not believe in what was going on in that persecution on that one day. And there were 2 SS people in front of our house. If my father had stayed home, he wouldn't have gotten into a concentration camp.
Yeah.
But I have to say about his musical prowess, my father, besides being a really excellent composer of especially synagogue music and oratorios and cantatas, he was an excellent pianist. And I, being a violinist, we played together every day for 2 hours, sonatas from Bach to Bartók.
Yeah.
And it was a great upbringing. Despite the terrible things that were happening in Germany, I can't complain about my upbringing.
Yeah. Let's introduce what we're going to hear now from the Symphony No. 2, which you dedicated to your father after he passed. Can you introduce that for us?
The symphony was written again for the Dallas Symphony, who had commissioned another piece. And because of the love of my father and of the family, he had written a work for violin and piano just before we left Germany. And I always loved the melody that he used for one of the pieces called Arcada, or Binding. And I used it in the first movement, but it comes back in the last movement. And since we're going to hear the second and third, the slow movement is really dedicated to him because it has the flavor of an elegy. And then the last movement again is full of energy instead of elegy, but it does bring back in long notes the music of my father at the very end, combined with the happiness that I felt being his son.
Composer Samuel Adler introducing his own music. We're going to hear the second and third movement from his Symphony No. 2. Once again, this is the Brandenburg State Orchestra, directed by Emily Freeman Brown, here on FM 91. What a fantastic recording of just wonderful, infectious music that makes you feel good just listening to it. I mean, that was the second and third movements from the Symphony No. 2, written in 1957 by composer Samuel Adler, who dedicated it to the memory of his father. That's a recent recording. It's just come out, called One Lives But Once, a 90th birthday celebration for Samuel Adler. That was the Brandenburg State Orchestra, directed by Emily Freeman Brown, the composer's wife, and you heard it here on FM 91. We are spending the afternoon, when I say we, I mean I and you, listeners, with Samuel Adler. Celebrated his 90th birthday this past Sunday. He's been so kind as to come in and talk about his life and talk about his music. In addition to that new recording of works for his 90th birthday, there's also a book called Building Bridges with Music, Stories from a Composer's Life. That's from Pendragon Press in New York. And we're talking about some of those stories today because there are some remarkable stories in there where you talk about people that I say their names a lot on the radio, but I certainly don't have any personal stories with folks like that. Yet you have these wonderful stories to tell.
A long
Sam.
life, you see.
Yeah.
You meet a lot of people.
Well, someday I hope to tell the story of Samuel Adler coming into my studio and talking on the radio.
Okay.
Let's talk a little bit about now, after you left Germany and you moved to Massachusetts. Your father got a job as a cantor in Worcester, Massachusetts, and that's where you grew up. And give us a sense of how you flowered and developed as a musician during that time. Did you know you wanted to be a composer then?
Well, of course, my father is a composer, so I wanted to be like him. And I started very early. My sister is also very musical. She still sings. And we had the kind of relationship where I would write a song and make her sing it. Mm-hmm. And I would get very angry at her if she sang it a wrong note or something. But anyway, we still have a very close relationship, and I'm very happy about that. But in the early days, my father was very strict. And he said, look, I don't want to see any of your childish explorations into music. I want you to learn something about how to write. Mm. And so when we came to Worcester, I was 11 years old, and he sent me to Boston to one of his good friends, Herbert Fromm, who was the music director at Temple Israel in Boston. He's also a very fine organist, and he said he would teach me. And so every week I took a bus into Boston and worked with him. He was an extraordinary composer, completely changed the music of the American synagogue.
Really?
By writing music in the style of Hindemith for the synagogue. It's very beautiful and very interesting. It's not played too much anymore because, of course, today everything is pop. But we won't talk about that right now. Yeah. At any rate, he was a terrific teacher. And I studied with him until I went to college. And he taught me harmony, counterpoint, and composition.
Yeah.
And I developed a kind of taste for new music through him. Because, you know, when you're a kid, you only love Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven, Schubert, and so on, which I still love, except that I really hated the 20th century. I even hated Impressionist music. But he slowly taught me how to go into that. And by the time I was an older teenager, like 15, 16, I loved especially American new music.
Yeah.
There was a series which, I'm sorry, is partially out of print, Howard Hanson and the Eastman Rochester Orchestra, and they recorded all this American music, and my friends and I ate it up. I mean, we just thought it was wonderful.
Right.
Copeland, Piston, Hanson, Creston, Persichetti, all these wonderful people.
See, you can say these names, and I say these names, but you actually knew and studied with these folks and worked with them.
Yeah, that was a little later, but I knew the music because I worked in a drugstore first, and then in a shoe store, because we were quite poor and I had to make some money. My sister, who is a commercial artist, worked in a fashion store, doing fashion things, and but this was much later. I started to work at 12 or 12 or 13 in the drugstore. I was a soda jerk. Now I'm just a jerk. But in those days, we had soda jerks.
I have a feeling you've said that before.
Yeah, I did. And in the shoe store. And for $1, you could buy an LP of this American music. And so by friends, I had 8 friends, and we played chamber music together. And we each bought a record for $1 every week. So we had this huge collection of American music, and we just loved it, and it became a model for me as a composer.
Yeah. I've read interviews with you where you have said that one of the most important things for a composer to be able to do is play an instrument.
That's right.
And you were a violinist, and then you went to the viola also.
Yes,
right?
well, one Friday afternoon, I was in the All-City Orchestra, and the conductor said, "Sam, here's a viola. On Monday, you play viola." That's how I became a violist.
Okay.
But that's what usually happens with violinists. We had too many violinists, too few violas.
Yeah.
One violist graduated, and so they needed another one. And over the weekend, you became a violist.
Yeah, I remember in school I wanted to be a flute player, and everybody wanted to play the flute, so he put me on clarinet.
That's it.
And then there were too many clarinetists, so I made it to the bassoon and stayed there for a while.
I thought the oboe, but the bassoon is the next one.
I skipped the oboe, went straight to the bassoon.
But it's a double reed anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the music that we're going to hear next. Well, actually, before we do that, I just want to say that we're talking with composer Samuel Adler. He's spending the whole afternoon with me today, and we're listening to his music, a wide range of music written over a 60-plus year career. Samuel Adler just celebrated his 90th birthday, and he's spending the afternoon with us. New recording that's come out called One Lives But Once, a 90th birthday celebration. We're going to link to all of these from our website at wgte.org when we archive this conversation. Also, the book, Building Bridges with Music. Can I just ask you, Sam, why that title?
Well, I've been lucky in my life all the way through, and there were opportunities to come together, especially when I was in the Army. That's when it first happened. There was conflict between our soldiers and the population, and I happened to speak the language, so I felt I could be a unifying force. And we could talk about it a little later, about what happened where I was stationed, because there was a great deal of animosity between our forces that were brought over and the population, because, of course, our troops didn't speak the language, didn't know anything about the history, and the population thought that American soldiers were nothing but drunkards and rapists. And I wanted very badly to bridge that gap. And I've had a chance to bridge the gap between Protestants and Catholics, and between Christians and Jews, and between a lot of people that I've come in contact with, especially also now people in the Far East. Both
Right.
Emily and I have been to China 4 times. We've been to Korea, to Taiwan, and all over the place. And there are always bridges to be built. And that's why I called it that, because I've been very fortunate in being in a position to build the bridges.
Yeah, and music. Music is the key.
That's it.
You mentioned the Far East, and I love the story you tell when you went to Taiwan, and the hotel clerk recognized you right away.
That's right. Because in Taiwan, when you have a concert, and I had a big concert in Taipei, they advertise it by putting a poster like a flag on each street light.
Yeah.
And
so your face was everywhere.
My face was on there, and it was all over Taipei. And when I got into the hotel, they recognized me. I was really shocked, but it was a very, very nice surprise.
We're going to take a quick break and come back with more music of Samuel Adler. We're also going to hear a piece by your father and by your teacher, Herbert Fromm. That's coming up here on Afternoon Classics. You're listening to Public Radio FM 91, WGTE FM Toledo, WGLE Lima, WGDE Defiance, WGBE Bryan, also online at WGTE.org.